Lauren woke up to the persistent sound of the doorbell. The noise was sharp, piercing, giving her no time to process what was happening. She propped herself up on her elbows and glanced sleepily at the clock. 2:17 a.m. Her heart skipped a beat. Who would show up at this hour? Throwing on her robe over her pajamas, she padded barefoot to the door, suppressing the shiver that ran down her spine. As she got closer, she pressed her eye to the peephole. Standing on the porch was an elderly woman in a worn-out coat, clutching an enormous, fluffy cat with wary amber eyes. Suddenly, the old woman swayed and collapsed to her knees. Lauren yanked the door open. "Ma'am, are you okay?" She barely managed to catch the woman by the shoulders, preventing her from falling further. The stranger's face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line, her breathing unsteady. The cat shifted restlessly in her arms, as if sensing something was wrong. "I don't feel well," the woman exhaled, offering a weak smile. "I'm sorry." "It's okay, let's get you inside," Lauren said, guiding her into the apartment and easing her onto the entryway ottoman. Her pulse was weak but steady. Lauren quickly grabbed her phone and dialed 911. "My neighbor, an elderly woman, collapsed at my door. She's breathing, but she's not well," she explained clearly, giving them her address. "An ambulance is on the way. Stay with her," the dispatcher instructed. Lauren crouched beside her, keeping her voice gentle. "What's your name?" "Helen," the woman whispered, offering a faint smile. "In my backpack?" "Documents." Lauren's eyes fell on the old battered backpack lying near the door. Peeking out of it was a worn medical folder. A siren shattered the quiet of the night. Moments later, the doorbell rang again. Lauren hurried to open it. Two paramedics, a man and a woman in dark blue uniforms, stepped inside, immediately assessing Helen's condition. "Pulse is weak, blood pressure is low. Ma'am, you need to come with us to the hospital," one of them said, looking at Helen. "My cat, Mr. Whipple," she rasped, her gaze flicking toward the fluffy giant now curled up on the rug. "I'll take care of him," Lauren said before she even realized it. Helen's eyes filled with gratitude. She gave Lauren's hand a faint squeeze before the paramedics carefully lifted her onto the stretcher and carried her out. The door shut behind them, leaving behind only the faint scent of antiseptic and silence. Lauren turned to the cat. He sat regally in the middle of the living room, studying her intently. It was as if he understood that his owner had vanished into the unknown. "Well, buddy?" Lauren sighed, sinking onto the couch. "Looks like it's just you and me." Mr. Whipple flicked his tail and, without hesitation, climbed into her lap, purring contentedly. The night was going to be a long one. Lauren woke up to a soft but insistent pressure on her chest. Opening her eyes, she met the steady gaze of Mr. Whipple. The cat, pleased with his morning routine, stretched lazily and nudged her with a paw, clearly demanding breakfast. All right, I get it," Lauren muttered, yawning. "You're the boss, I'm just the tenant." She got out of bed and headed to the kitchen. As she filled his bowl with dry food, her thoughts drifted back to the events of the night before. Who was Helen? Why had she come to her? And more importantly, what was she supposed to do with this enormous, fluffy house guest? After making herself a coffee, Lauren decided to find out more about her unexpected visitor. She grabbed her phone and dialed the hospital number she had memorized from the paramedics' uniforms. "Good morning. My name is Lauren Cassidy. An elderly woman named Helen was admitted to your hospital last night. I just wanted to check on her condition." "Are you a relative?" asked a polite female voice. "No, but I was with her when she collapsed. I just want to make sure she's okay." "Hold on a moment." The woman on the other end paused, then continued. "Helen has been stabilized, but she'll need to stay a few more days for observation." Lauren exhaled in relief. "Can I visit her?" "Of course, but only in the afternoon," the nurse replied. "She'd probably appreciate some company." Lauren thanked her and hung up. Well, that settled her plans for the day. But before heading to the hospital, she needed to figure out where Helen lived. Walking down the street, Lauren stopped by a neighbor, Mrs. Davis, an elderly woman known for knowing everything about everyone in the neighborhood. "Good morning, Mrs. Davis," Lauren greeted her with a smile. "Do you happen to know where Helen lives?" The old woman narrowed her eyes, adjusting the scarf on her head. "Helen Foster? Of course, that house across the street. Why do you ask?" "She collapsed at my door last night," Lauren explained. "She's in the hospital now." Mrs. Davis's expression darkened. Poor woman. Her grandson is nothing but trouble. They say he takes her money, intimidates her. The whole block knows, but she never complains. A knot tightened in Lauren's stomach. She thanked Mrs. Davis and headed toward Helen's house. Climbing the steps, she rang the doorbell. A minute passed before the door creaked open. A young man with a bloated face and disheveled hair stood in the doorway. The air reeked of stale alcohol and cigarette smoke. "What do you want?" he snapped, squinting at her. Lauren instantly knew this was the grandson. "I came to pick up some things for Helen," she said calmly. "Yeah, right," he sneered and started shutting the door. But Lauren quickly wedged her foot in the doorway. "Helen is in the hospital, and you're here drinking in her house?" she asked coldly. The man scowled but said nothing. Lauren felt anger bubbling inside her. She never considered herself particularly brave, but the thought of this guy taking advantage of an elderly woman made her forget her fear. "Get out," she said firmly. "This house belongs to Helen, not you. Leave now, or I call the police." He laughed dryly. "Oh, come on," he drawled, stretching lazily. "None of your business, girl." Lauren stepped forward. "You leave now, or I call the cops and report you for fraud and elder abuse." He stared at her for a few seconds, then shrugged. "Fine, I was leaving anyway," he muttered, shuffling back inside, grabbing a few things, and throwing her a dark look before walking out. Lauren took a deep breath, watching him go. She didn't know if he'd be back, but for now, he was gone. Now, she had to get Helen's home back in order. Lauren stood at the threshold of Helen's apartment, holding Mr. Tot Whipple in her arms. The cat purred loudly, nuzzling into her shoulder as she slid the key into the lock. The door creaked open, revealing a spacious but neglected living room. The air was thick with dust, mingled with something else, stale paper, a hint of mustiness, and the faintest trace of cinnamon. She set Mr. Whipple down, and he immediately took off to explore his new territory. "All right, buddy, looks like we've got some work to do," Lauren muttered, glancing around. She wasn't usually one to get emotional, but something tightened in her chest. This place had clearly been a home once, warm and full of life, but now it felt abandoned. It was obvious that keeping up with the apartment had become too much for Helen. Lauren rolled up her sleeves and got to work. She opened the windows, letting in the crisp afternoon air. After a few hours, the dusty shelves gleamed, the furniture looked refreshed, and the floor creaked under her feet as if in gratitude. She checked the time. Helen was supposed to be discharged in a few days. Would she be able to get everything ready in time? A week had passed before Lauren finally saw Helen again. The elderly woman looked frail, but her eyes still sparkled with kindness. "Oh, my goodness," Helen murmured, taking in the apartment. "It's so clean." Lauren smiled as Mr. Whipple leaped into Helen's lap, purring like an engine. "I just did a little tidying up," she said. Helen turned to her, gratitude shining in her eyes. "You didn't just clean. You saved my home." They sat down on the couch, and Lauren finally asked the question that had been gnawing at her since she learned about Helen's grandson. "Why didn't you tell someone? The police could have helped." Helen sighed heavily, looking down at her hands. "He used to be a good boy, Lauren, smart, kind, but after his mother died, she trailed off, shaking her head. "It's the alcohol. He's not the boy I raised anymore." Lauren thought for a moment. She knew that people could change, but only if they truly wanted to. "Has he come by?" she asked gently. Helen nodded. "A few times. He asked for money. I said no, and he left. For now." Lauren clenched her fists. She couldn't just leave Helen to deal with this alone. "You shouldn't have to put up with this." "I know, sweetheart." Lauren spent the evening keeping Helen company, telling stories and making her laugh, if only for a little while. When the elderly woman dozed off in her chair, Lauren knew she had made up her mind. She wasn't going anywhere. She was staying. Whatever happened next, Helen wouldn't face it alone. Lauren woke up to loud knocking at the door. She sat up abruptly, her heart pounding. Glancing at the clock, 2:14 a.m. Who would show up at this hour? She slid out of bed quietly, careful not to wake Helen, and crept toward the living room. The knocking came again, impatient, agitated. "Open up!" came a familiar male voice. "Justin." Lauren took a deep breath, steadying herself before cracking the door open. A young man stood before her, his face puffy, his t-shirt wrinkled and stained. His eyes were bloodshot, and the stench of alcohol clung to him. "What do you want?" Lauren folded her arms. Justin smirked, swaying slightly. I need money. Where's Grandma? Sleeping, she said firmly. Wake her up, it's important. Important for who? You? She blocked the doorway, not letting him inside. His smirk faltered. What the hell are you even doing here? Living with her? Sucking up to her? Unlike you, I actually take care of her, Lauren shot back. Justin scoffed. Please, I'm her only family. Family doesn't do what you do. His expression darkened. I'm getting real tired of your crap, you know that? I just need a few bucks, then I'm out of here. Lauren shook her head. No. He stepped forward and she tensed. Don't push me, he growled. Lauren didn't back down. Leave, Justin. He stared at her for a few seconds before letting out a sharp breath and turning away. This isn't over, he muttered as he disappeared into the night. Lauren let out a shaky breath, but the unease lingered. The next morning, Helen looked worried. Was he here? Lauren nodded. I didn't let him in. Helen ran a hand over her face. I don't know what to do. Lauren hesitated. I looked into something. There's a rehab center. Good people, good program, a few months, and Helen shook her head. He won't agree to that. We have to try. A few days later, Lauren finally found Justin, only this time not at their door. She tracked him down at a dingy bar, drinking alone. Oh, look who it is, he sneered. Here to lecture me? No, Lauren said calmly. I'm here to offer you help. He snorted. I don't need help. You say that because you're scared. His jaw tightened. I'm not scared of anything. Then prove it. Go to rehab. He glared at her, his grip tightening around his drink. Get lost. Lauren sighed and stood. Next time, Grandma won't open the door. She turned to leave. Wait, he said quietly. She paused but didn't turn around. Give me time to think about it. Lauren closed her eyes, feeling the tiniest flicker of hope. It was a start. The years had passed in the blink of an eye. Looking back on her life, Lauren could hardly believe how much had changed. Once, she had simply opened the door in the middle of the night and let a frail old woman with a giant fluffy cat into her home. And now she had a family. Against all odds, Justin had completed rehab. He even stayed on to work at the center, helping people who were once in the same dark place he had been. His face no longer looked swollen, his eyes were no longer bloodshot. And in them, Lauren finally saw the kindness Helen had always spoken of. They never became best friends, but they had learned to respect each other. Lauren had changed too. She met Mike, a kind, caring man with whom she could talk about anything. Their relationship blossomed quickly, and soon they were married. A year later, they welcomed their son, Henry. Helen was over the moon about the baby. She would sit with him for hours, telling stories from her youth, humming old lullabies. The moment Henry learned to walk, he went straight for Mr. Whipple, and despite his age, the cat let him do whatever he wanted, tug his tail, pull his ears, and even use him as a battlefield for his toy soldiers. I think he's found himself a new best friend, Lauren laughed. Life was good. Everything felt perfect, until one morning, Lauren walked into Helen's room. The old woman was peacefully asleep in her chair by the window, wrapped in a warm wool blanket. Lauren stepped closer, ready to wake her. Helen, it's time for breakfast. She gently touched her hand and felt her heart drop. Cold. Helen. Lauren sank to her knees, tears blurring her vision. The doctor arrived soon after, but he only confirmed what she already knew. Helen was gone. She was 92 years old. The funeral was small and quiet. Everyone who had known Helen came to say their goodbyes. Neighbors, hospital staff, even a few people from the rehab center. Justin stood strong, but Lauren saw his hands tremble as he placed flowers on the coffin. She was the best thing that ever happened to me, he murmured. Lauren squeezed his hand. After the funeral, she couldn't bring herself to go through Helen's things. It felt like a betrayal. But one evening when the house had fallen into silence, she stepped into Helen's room. She opened the closet, then the dresser, carefully sorting through her belongings. In the desk drawer, she found a thick folder with her name on it. Inside was a folded piece of paper. Dear Lauren, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. Don't be sad, sweetheart. I've lived a long, happy life, and these past few years have been the warmest of them all. I wanted to say thank you for everything. You didn't just change my life, you changed Justin's. You gave him a second chance when even I was too afraid to. You became the daughter I never had. That's why I want you to know, the apartment is yours now, And the money you gave me for rent, I've been saving it for you and your family. I also have a small amount set aside for Justin. I trust he'll put it to good use. Take care, sweetheart. Lauren closed her eyes, letting the tears fall freely. She thought she had lost a piece of her family, but the truth was, Helen had never left. She remained in the memories, in the home, in every corner of their lives. Lauren pressed the letter to her chest and whispered, "Thank you, Helen, for everything." Months passed, but Helen's presence still lingered in the house. Every time Lauren walked by her room, she had to resist the urge to knock, expecting to hear that familiar voice, "Come in, sweetheart." But the door remained closed. The home that once belonged to Helen was now hers, and yet it still felt like it belonged to Helen, filled with the scent of fresh-baked cookies and cat fur. Even Mr. Whipple seemed lost. He would sit by Helen's door for hours as if waiting for her to return. "She wouldn't want us to be sad," Lauren murmured, gently stroking his soft fur. But saying it was one thing, accepting it was another. One evening, Lauren sat on the porch watching Henry play in the yard. Justin walked up and took a seat beside her. "Hey," he said. "Hey." Lauren glanced at him. He looked different, more confident, more at peace. "I just wanted to say thank you," he said, swirling his coffee in his hands. "Not just for what you did for me, but for what you did for Helen. She was happy in the end." Lauren smiled, warmth spreading in her chest. "You did the work, Justin," she said. "I'm proud of you." He nodded, trying to hide the emotion in his eyes. "I think it's time for me to move forward," he admitted after a pause. "I want to open a small center for recovering addicts. Helen left me some money, and I want it to go towards something meaningful." Lauren felt her breath catch. "She would love that," she said, giving his hand a squeeze. Another year passed. Lauren and Mike continued building their life, raising Henry. Justin opened his rehab center, dedicating his time to helping those searching for a way out. But one day, Lauren realized she had one more important decision to make. She sat in Helen's favorite chair by the window, holding a drowsy Mr. Whipple in her lap. And in that moment, she knew it was time to let go. The next morning, she called a realtor. Helen's house was full of memories, but it didn't belong to her alone anymore. It was time for it to become someone else's new beginning. As she packed up the last of Helen's things, she found another letter, tucked inside the pages of an old book. "Lauren, life is always changing. A home isn't just walls, it's the people you love. And no matter where you go, you'll always be home. With love, Helen." Lauren smiled through her tears. Helen was right.